the last episode I talked about when you're attached to something too much, then the opposite will show up for you. Now, if you haven't listened to it yet, I suggest you do that before listening to this particular episode. Now, you might have heard the phrase, what you focus on expands. But what does that really mean, and how is it relevant to attachment? Well, that's what I'm going to go through on this particular episode. So, I want you to paint a picture for yourself. I want you to imagine a submarine. And when you imagine that submarine, I want you to first of all see the submarine in a great big ocean, but it's submerged just below the surface of the water. And the only thing sticking out of the water is the periscope. Now, as soon as you have that image in your mind, you can see the submarine just below the surface of the water, and the only thing that's sticking out is the periscope. And you can see that periscope turning from side to side as it looks for its surroundings and looks out for other ships. Now, once you have that image in your mind, I want you now to go inside the submarine. And by being inside the submarine, you're now actually standing at the periscope, looking through the lens to see what is outside the actual submarine itself. And you're turning the periscope from side to side to have a look out for other ships. And all the while you're looking through the lens of the periscope, you're focused on searching for other ships and vessels. Now imagine that you're doing that for a few hours. You're totally concentrated on the view from the periscope. You're focused on what it is that you're looking for. Now you're focused, but you're not attached to whether there's a ship there or not. You don't know, in fact, if a ship is going to even turn up. You're just being focused on looking for ships. You've also no idea of where they're going to turn up from, what they're going to look like, or how big they're going to be, what's on board the ships. You're just focused on looking for ships. Now, other stuff might turn up like swimmers or birds or fish, but you're just focused on ships. But again, whether they turn up or not is none of your concern. It would be really great if they did, but because at least it would break the monotony. But whether they do or not is of absolutely no concern to you, and neither is how they actually turn up. That's what focus is. And that's how not being attached to is connected to your focus. When you're focused on something that you want to have in your life show up, I want you to imagine the level of focus as if you're looking through a periscope lens. What happens for most people, however, is that they just don't have the focus. They either jump from one thing that they want to the next thing that they want. There's no consistency. And in some cases, they don't even know what they want. And the ones that do have the focus, they're too attached, and therefore the opposite of what they want shows up. Now, another element of focus is that when you're being called to something else, but you're maintaining your focus on another thing, then all that you try will not work. Now, I talked about this in two episodes, the one which I called the call, and the other episode which I called the boat and the pontoon. It happens at that critical line between a state of belief and a state of knowing. You're being called forward by your unconscious to something else, which is bringing you to a state of knowing. So what happens is you've been living your life in a particular way. You've been developing your business or developing your career in a particular way. But your unconscious has been called forward to go in a different direction. You're being asked to move forward. That's where I refer to as being the call. And what's happening when that call happens is that you have one foot in the boat and one foot on the pontoon. It's that difference. It's that space in between the state of belief and the state of knowing. Now, when you're focused and you're trying to maintain your focus on what it is that you've always been doing up until now, whereas you're being called forward to something else, whatever you work on, it just won't work. You can try all you want, but it just won't work. But as soon as you start following what you're being drawn to, which is bringing you through to a state of knowing, then it becomes more effortless. It's a completely different way of operating. It's a different way of working when you're absolutely in a state of knowing. Yet because you're so used to operating and working in your career, your business, all of your life, it's what you know. You don't know any different. You're not used to working in a new way. That's when people struggle and wonder why things aren't working for them anymore. That's when you need to be guided through this change the most. That change between a state of belief and a state of knowing. That crossroads that many people come across. And as soon as you get the hang of how you bring about things in your life, then you accelerate up to higher states and have more fun. You're finally out of the matrix way of working and into a more effortless way of working. Now, are there times you're going to fall back into your old ways? Of course there are. But that's when you've got to catch yourself or have a mentor. I'm able to catch my clients when they're doing it. The more you experience this, the more you'll actually understand what I mean, what I described in previous episodes. So how will you know if this is happening to you? Well, if you find that things aren't working in your business or your career the way they used to, and therefore if it feels that you're stagnating or you're actually falling behind or even going backwards, yet when you observe others around you, you can see them progressing, then that's when you need to take stock. When you find yourself feeling a lack of fulfillment or meaning, then that can be an indicator. When you feel a sense of restlessness in your life, whether it be in your business, your career, or your relationships, then that can be an indicator too. When you find other things showing up in your life that you're being drawn to, but they don't really fit in what it is that you're actually doing up until now in your business or a career, that too can be an indicator. In essence, there can be so many different aspects. Sometimes it can be hard to know for yourself, and therefore it can feel frustrating. But when I can tap into a client intuitively and see what's happening at a deeper level, then I know what they're supposed to be doing, especially if it's around their purpose. That's why you can still focus on what you want, but yet still not get what you want, because your unconscious is trying to guide you towards something else, but you're trying to fight it. Now, how do I know? Because I had to go through this exact same battle all by myself, and I put up a really, really great fight until such times I had to surrender. And I also see it happening with clients. And as soon as they start to follow their path and do what I direct them to do, then things become easier. So remember, it's about maintaining your focus without attachment. But if you're focused on the wrong thing, then your unconscious won't enable it to be brought about. It's all about being on your right path, your purpose, what you're supposed to be doing. Now, throughout all these episodes, I'm trying to help you navigate your way. But if you're having difficulty, then please reach out to me. Life is so much easier when you know the right path. So let me explain what happens in the brain. That when you're focused on what it is that you want, and in this way you'll understand why it actually works this way. So there's two main things that happen. Firstly, there's a part in the brain called the Reticular Activation System, or the RAS for short. Now, this is a part that filters out all the information that your mind takes in and narrows it down to what is actually important to you. So let me give an example of how this works in practical terms. Now, in your mind, go back to a time when you bought the car that you now drive. And what you'll remember is that in the first few weeks, when you got that new car, you'll have seen other cars of the same colour, the same make, the same model as the car that you just purchased. It's like everywhere you go, you see the same car as the one you've just bought. Now, did these cars exist and were driving around before you bought your car? Yeah, of course they were. You just didn't notice them because they weren't actually important to you at the time. What's happened when you bought your car was that your RAS was activated to seek out other cars of the same make, same colour and same model. You didn't tell your conscious mind to look for them. It's just doing it naturally and bring them to your attention. Now, I'm going to repeat that again. It's just doing it naturally and bringing it to your attention. You're not actively doing anything. It's doing it for you. Now, you can see how powerful this is. All you have to do is make something important enough for you, which is where your focus comes into play, and then your RAS will be activated for what it is that you want. So how does an activated RAS work for you when you're focused on something that you want? Well, when you're focused on something that's important, what will happen is that it will filter out everything that is not relevant and present you with what you do actually want. Now, I'm going to give you a recent example of how I activated this for myself in order to achieve something that I wanted. Now, it may seem something small, but it will give you an idea of how I operate and how the RAS works and how this whole executive code works for my clients and people that I work with. So a while back, I said that I wanted to have 5 podcast interviews done with other podcasters by the end of a particular month. In other words, that they would interview me for their podcast, and that way I could share my information with their audience. So that's what I set my focus on, and then I let it go. In other words, I had no attachment of how it was going to come about. Now, within the first couple of weeks, I had 4 interviews scheduled. I hadn't done anything. I didn't research who would be a podcaster that I should get interviewed with, or start sending introduction emails or anything like that whatsoever. I literally didn't do anything. In essence, I just sat back and enjoyed how it was going to happen. Then all of a sudden, this is what happened. I received an email from a podcaster saying that they want to interview me. Then I see a note on Facebook about a podcaster wanting to set up interviews. Then I remembered a podcaster that I had spoken to before and that she was looking to interview me. Then when I was speaking to a client, yes, Sharon, this is you if you're listening, she had done a podcast interview with someone else and she suggested that I should be interviewed by him too. So in essence, I had literally done nothing, yet I had 4 podcast interviews arranged. Now, were there actions taken? Yes, there were. Could I have consciously thought about selecting podcasters that could interview me and then going through and developing a relationship with them to see if they would in fact interview me? Now, there's a huge number of things that I could have done consciously, but that's work. What the RAS is doing is filtering out all of what is not relevant, heightening and bringing to your attention what's important. When you have your executive center in equilibrium with your unconscious and the superconscious, as I spoke about before, and you activate your RAS, then that's how it comes about. You're following the prompts from your unconscious instead of you consciously thinking about what it is that could be done. But now you're saying to yourself, yeah, but Paul, you said you wanted 5 and you only got 4. Oh, I love that comment because it demonstrates how we look at the gap instead of actually minding the gap. And again, that's a reference to a previous episode. Okay, so let me tell you what happened. I'm there having a podcast interview with one of the podcasters, and there's so much content that I'm sharing, and she likes the analogies that I use and how I explain things that are of huge benefit to her audience, that all of a sudden she says, okay, that's part 1 of the interview. I haven't asked Paul yet, but I want to have him back for a part 2. Paul, I hope you'll agree and come back. I'm not joking you. That's how it all happened. And that day, I had my 5 interviews scheduled, well before the end of the month that I had set. As I said, I literally didn't do anything. That's just one example. This happens pretty much for the majority of things I want to have happen. That's what I call effortless working. I focused. I wasn't attached to how it was going to come about, and I followed my unconscious prompts. Now, could I have consciously thought about how that 5th interview was going to take place in the way that it did? There's absolutely no way. That's when you can start to enjoy it all, have fun with it, and see how it's going to show up. It's like getting a surprise present every single time because you can't even envisage how it's actually going to come about. Now, there's more elements to it, but I want to get the main points to you. So what's actually really happening? Well, I'm going to speak a bit more about the mechanics of what's actually happening on the next episode, which is going to be called To Infinity and Beyond. But for now, I want to cover another aspect of how the brain works. And that's what's called confirmation bias. You see, when we have a belief about something, then our mind will look for things to confirm our belief. So let's say you have a belief about something. Then everything that you will see and the evidence that you will gather will be presented in a way that confirms that belief. So say you believe that there's a person in your life and he's a particular type of character, say a not so nice character. Then everything you observe about that person will present the evidence to you that you're right. And no matter what anybody else says to the contrary will convince you. If you believe that the earth is flat, then all the evidence will confirm to you that the earth is flat. That's how confirmation bias works. So it can work for you or it can work against you. So let me join a couple of dots for you. When you're focused on something without attachment, your RAS will guide you to bring that about. Your confirmation bias will work in your favour in order to confirm your belief. And so that's the next part, your belief. You see, if you don't believe it, then it's not going to happen. So if I didn't believe the 5 podcast interviews were going to be scheduled by the end of that particular month, then they wouldn't have been. Because if you don't have the belief, then in effect there's nothing to be confirmed. If your belief is for the opposite to happen, then that's what the RAS and confirmation bias will actually filter for you to confirm for you. So the questions I have for you are, do you have a focus? And what is it that you're focused on? Are you working against your unconscious and trying to dictate how things should come about? And are you maintaining your focus with belief? And you might ask, well, how do I do that? Well, that's what I teach my clients, as a much deeper understanding is needed. Now, if you want to find out more about how I do that and teach my clients, just reach out to me. Go to theexecutivecode.com. And if you have any questions, just email me at paul@davisbusinessconsultants.com. And don't forget, sharing is caring. So please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues and leave a review for us. But until the next time, as always, I wish you every success.